Hello and welcome back. So we had been discussing the gaps or the uncertainty in certain epistemological status, and we had picked up on a priori knowledge. We continue with that. A priori knowledge is often taken to be certain and universally applicable, but there are instances where seemingly a priori knowledge, such as in mathematics, is later found to have hidden assumptions or contradictions. Gap, uncertainty about the true nature of a priori knowledge can lead to epistemological difficulties when it is presumed to be infallible or universally valid. So, what is the solution? Developing a more flexible and fallibilistic view of a priori knowledge, acknowledging that it may evolve or be refined through interaction with empirical evidence and logical certainty. Now, let us also discuss the limits in explaining contingent fact, which is a part of a priori gaps. A priori knowledge does not help in understanding contingent facts, such as historical events or scientific phenomena, where experience plays a crucial role. Acknowledging that a priori knowledge is best suited for necessary truths, while empirical knowledge must complement it in explaining contingent truths. Now that we have checked on the gaps in a priori knowledge, we must also look into the gaps in a posteriori knowledge or empirical knowledge. Empirical knowledge, as we understand, is derived from sensory experiences and observation. While empirical knowledge has provided immense insight into the natural world, it also faces several limitations and gaps. First, dependence on sensory perception. Empirical knowledge is dependent on human senses, sight, touch, hearing, which are fallible and can be subject to misinterpretation or limitations, example, optical illusions, hearing issues. Gap, sensory limitations affect the accuracy and completeness of empirical knowledge, as human senses are not perfect instruments for perceiving all aspects of reality. Solution, technological advancements. Example, microscopes, telescopes, sensors can extend sensory perception, allowing us to observe and measure phenomena beyond normal human capacity, thus improving the scope of empirical knowledge. Observer bias and subjectivity. Empirical knowledge can be influenced by observer biasness, prejudices, or subjective interpretation. This is particularly relevant in fields like psychology, sociology, and even certain areas of natural science. Now, if you talk about the biasness as gaps, let us delve a little bit more into that. Biases in data collection, interpretation, and analysis can distort empirical findings, leading to inaccurate or misleading conclusions. What is the solution? More rigorous methodologies such as double-blind experiments, peer review, and statistical techniques to control for biases can improve the accuracy and reliability of empirical knowledge. Now, incompleteness and generalization. Empirical knowledge often involves generalizations based on limited data. This can lead to hasty generalizations or theories that do not fully capture the complexities of the observed phenomena. Gap of incompleteness in empirical knowledge arises from limitations in the data available for analysis or the inability to account for all variables in a given scenario. Solution: expanding sample sizes, improving research designs, and utilizing longitudinal studies can help improve the representativeness and accuracy of empirical conclusions. Causality and complexity. Establishing causal relationships in empirical research can be challenging. Many empirical studies rely on correlation rather than causation, leading to ambiguous or incomplete explanations. The gap, Empirical methods often struggle to establish clear causal links due to the complexity of the real-world symptoms and the presence of confounding variables. What is the possible solution? Improved experimental designs, including controlled experiments and longitudinal studies, can help establish causality more clearly. Additionally, causal inference models and statistical controls may improve the robustness of empirical conclusions. Limits of inductive inference. Empirical knowledge often relies on inductive reasoning, where conclusions are generalized from observed patterns. This approach is inherently probabilistic and cannot guarantee universal truth. Gap. Inductive reasoning does not provide certainty, and there is always a risk that observed patterns might not hold universally or might be subject to unforeseen variables. Solution. Enhancing statistical reasoning, applying Bayesian methods to quantify uncertainty, and conducting replication studies can help improve the confidence in inductive conclusions. Also, we have just about noticed that both a priori knowledge and empirical knowledge are indispensable in philosophy and the sciences, and they're rightly the sources of knowledge and very clearly significant ones. But they each have had their inherent gaps, and the gaps have been addressed, and possible way outs or bridging the gaps have also been mentioned. By bridging these approaches, we can overcome many of the gaps that limit our understanding of reality. Now, the relationship between realism, which is yet another source of epistemology, idealism, a priori knowledge, and empirical knowledge revolves around their differing views on the nature of reality, the role of the mind, and the source of knowledge. These philosophical perspectives offer contrasting accounts of how we come to know the world and the interplay between reason and experience. Now, quickly let us revisit some of these connects of realism, epistemology. Also, let us see the connection with idealism, a priori knowledge, and empirical knowledge. As reiterated before, realism posits that the external world exists independently of the mind. The distinction between direct realism and indirect realism relates to how this external reality is accessed and understood. Direct realism is often defined as something which is perceived directly as it is, without the mediation of mental representations or ideas. Epistemology, empirical knowledge, is primary. Sensory experience provides unfiltered access to the world. A priori knowledge plays a minimal role, limited to logical structures or innate reasoning that aids empirical investigation. Criticism is that it struggles to account for perceptual errors, illusions, or variations in individual experiences. Indirect realism, the definition is often defined as we do not perceive objects directly, but rather through mental representations or sense data caused by the external world. Epistemology, empirical knowledge is indirect. Sensory input is mediated and interpreted by the mind. A priori knowledge is significant in shaping how sensory data are processed and understood. Now, connection to idealism with realism is that indirect realism acknowledges the role of the mind in shaping perceptions, though it maintains that an external world exists independently. Now, if we are to further see the connect of the various sources of knowledge, we will be noticing that in idealism, a priori knowledge as primary, and in empirical knowledge as constructed. Knowledge begins with innate structures or universal principles of the mind. These principles organize and give meaning to sensory knowledge under a priori knowledge as primary. Empirical knowledge is constructed. Empirical knowledge arises only when a priori concepts are applied to sensory data. For example, Kant argued that space and time are a priori forms of intuitions that structure all possible experiences. Now, realism and a priori knowledge. Realism, particularly direct realism, downplays the role of a priori knowledge, emphasizing sensory experience as the direct route to understanding reality. Indirect realism aligns more closely with idealism by recognizing that the mind imposes certain structures on sensory data, relying on a priori principles to bridge the gap between the external world and perception. We must thus notice that the connections between realism, idealism, a priori knowledge and empirical knowledge revolved around their differing emphasis or emphases on the roles of the mind and sensory experience. Realism generally prioritizes empirical knowledge, especially in its direct form, while idealism elevates a priori knowledge as foundational. Indirect realism bridges these perspectives by acknowledging the interpretative role of the mind, aligning partially with idealism. Together, these frameworks enrich the philosophical discourse on the sources and limits of human knowledge. Okay. Now that we have discussed so many variations of sources of knowledge, from realism, direct and indirect, to idealism, to empirical knowledge, to a priori knowledge, I think now is just the right time to pick up yet another source of knowledge, and that is the introspective knowledge. Now, what is this introspective knowledge? Introspective knowledge is knowledge acquired through inward examination of one's own thoughts, feelings, mental states, or consciousness. It is often considered a fundamental source of self-awareness and understanding direct from external sensory or empirical observation. What are its key features? First, self-referential. That is, introspective knowledge is about the self. It involves turning one's attention inward to observe one's mental processes and emotional states. First-person perspective. Unlike external observations, introspection provides direct access to one's own mind from a subjective viewpoint. Immediate access. Introspection is often described as immediate and non-inferential. One directly knows their mental states without needing external evidence. Fallibility and limits. Though seemingly direct, introspection can be prone to errors, biases, and incomplete awareness, challenging the reliability as a source of knowledge. Now, what are the types of introspective knowledge? 1. Cognitive states. Awareness of beliefs, thoughts, reasoning, and decision-making processes. Example, knowing you believe hard work leads to success. Emotional states. Understanding feelings like happiness, sadness, anger, or fear. Example, recognizing that you feel anxious before a public speech. Sensory states. Awareness of bodily sensations or perceptions. Example, realizing you have a headache or feel warmed in the sun. Volitional states. Awareness of desires, intentions, or motives. Example, knowing you intend to finish a project before the deadline. So, what then is the philosophical perspectives on introspective knowledge? Let's talk a little bit about rationalism here. Introspection is seen as a key source of knowledge, offering insights into universal truths and the mind's innate structures. Example, Descartes' cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, relies on introspection as evidence of the existence of the self. empiricism. Some empiricists are skeptical of introspection's reliability, arguing that it lacks the objectivity and verifiability of sensory-based empirical knowledge. Example, Hume doubted that introspection could reveal a unified self, instead perceiving only a bundle of perceptions. Now, let's also talk about phenomenology in connection to introspection. Introspection is central to phenomenology, which studies the structure of consciousness and lived experiences from a first-person perspective. Example, Husserl's method of bracketing suspends assumptions about the external world to focus on introspective experiences. Behaviorism, on the other hand, rejects introspection as a valid source of knowledge, arguing that it is subjective and unverifiable. They advocate for studying observable behaviors instead. Cognitive science. Modern cognitive science integrates introspection with empirical methods to study mental processes, though introspective reports are treated with caution due to potential biases. Strengths of introspective knowledge. Direct access to the mind. It provides unique insights unavailable through external observations or empirical methods. Foundation of self-knowledge. It is critical for understanding one's motivations, desires, and values. Moral and ethical awareness. It helps in self-reflection and moral reasoning, contributing to personal growth. Basis for other knowledge forms, often a starting point for philosophical inquiry or psychological theories. Now, we must also check out on the various limitations that introspection or introspective knowledge as a source of knowledge faces. The first is subjectivity. Introspective knowledge is inherently personal and cannot be independently verified. Biases, self-deception, emotional distortions, and cognitive biases can affect the accuracy of introspective judgments. Incompleteness. Many mental processes occur unconsciously beyond the reach of introspection. Error-prone nature. People may misinterpret or misremember their internal states. Now, let us talk about some of the examples of introspective knowledge in philosophy. We begin with the Socratic method. Socrates emphasized self-examination as a path to wisdom. Know thyself. Kant's transcendental idealism. Introspection is vital for understanding the mind's role in structuring experience. Contemporary epistemology. Introspection contributes to understanding subjective states like belief, knowledge, and justification. Applications of introspective knowledge, psychology and therapy. Introspection aids in recognizing and addressing mental health issues. Example, mindfulness, journaling, cognitive behavioral therapy. Moral philosophy. Self-reflection helps individuals align actions with their values and ethical principles. Creative processes. Artists, writers, and thinkers often rely on introspection to generate ideas and understand creative impulses. So, introspective knowledge is a vital yet complex source of knowledge, offering direct insight into one's inner life. While it provides unique access to mental states and self-awareness, its limitations such as subjectivity and susceptibility to error underscores the need for careful reflection and, where possible, external validation. In the broader epistemological framework, introspection complements other sources of knowledge, enriching our understanding of the self and the human experience. Now I think we are just good to understand the connection or the relationship between idealism and introspective knowledge. It is interesting to note that these two sources of knowledge, though they are similar on a lot of grounds, but they do have their own individual standing. Let's decode. The connection between idealism and introspective knowledge is grounded on their shared emphasis on the mind, consciousness, and the role of self in constructing or perceiving reality. Idealist philosophies often elevate introspection as a crucial source of knowledge, given their view that reality is fundamentally shaped by mental or spiritual processes. We had noted in our lecture that idealism's core tenet has been mind-centric, subjective experience, self-reflection, and truth. Introspective knowledge in idealism, we see that both of them have a direct access to the mind. For idealists, introspection is the means by which one gains access to the fundamental structure and the truths of the mind. Plato emphasized the importance of contemplating the forms which reside in the realm of intellect and are accessible through self-reflection. We have also discussed the philosophical connections of self-knowledge as central to reality, idealist perspective. Reality is mind-dependent, thus understanding oneself is key to understanding the nature of existence. For Socrates, the idealist Socratic principle, know thyself, highlights the role of introspection in uncovering fundamental truths. In Hegel, on the other hand, Hegel's idealism, the development of self-consciousness through introspection is essential for understanding the absolute or ultimate reality. We have also discussed the limits of empirical knowledge, and I would like to address once again that idealists argue that empirical knowledge based on sensory data is secondary and incomplete. Introspective knowledge, by contrast, accesses deeper truths about the mind and existence. Metaphysical and spiritual insights. Many forms of idealism, especially in religious or metaphysical traditions, view introspection as a means of connecting with higher truths or the divine. For example, Vedantic idealism in Indian philosophy sees introspection as a way to realize the self, Atman, and its unity with the ultimate reality, Brahman. Now, let us discuss the strengths of introspective knowledge in idealism. Foundation of reality. Introspection aligns with idealism's view that the mind constructs or perceives reality. A priori discovery, it enables access to universal truths and innate principles that govern the structure of knowledge. Inner unity and coherence, it encourages self-awareness and coherence in understanding one's place in the world. Challenges and critiques, subjectivity and biasness. Critics argue that introspection is prone to error and self-deception, questioning its reliability. Solipsism, the idealist emphasis on introspection risks isolating the individual, leading to the problem of solipsism. Empirical ignorance. By prioritizing introspective knowledge, idealism may undervalue the contributions of empirical, science, and sensory data. Now, the modern relevance, phenomenology. It builds on idealism by using introspection to study consciousness and subjective experience systematically. Example, Husserl's focus on lived experience. Psychology and self-awareness. Introspection remains central in understanding mental states, motivations, and behaviors, echoing idealist principles of self-reflection as foundational to knowledge. So we see that the connection between idealism and introspective knowledge is intrinsic and profound. Idealism views introspection as the gateway to understanding the mind, uncovering universal truths and explaining the nature of reality. While introspection's subjectivity poses challenges, it aligns with idealism's emphasis on the mind's centrality making it a cornerstone of idealist epistemology and metaphysics. So, we have been discussing the sources of knowledge on the paper Epistemology, floated by University of Delhi for 6th semester DSc 18, and we have covered so far the sources of knowledge starting from realism to idealism to empirical knowledge, a priori knowledge, and now recently the introspective knowledge or introspection. We will continue more in our next lecture series. Thank you so much.